that the scourge of crime, in particular murders, have bedeviled the Jamaican society and has, quite frankly, adversely impacted our psyche as a people. We have, over many decades, had to grapple with violence in our society, senseless murders, and in many respects, it could be argued that we have become desensitized. Yes? Desensitized to murders. So much so that oftentimes when we hear of a life being snuffed out, persons will turn to you and say, boy, I wonder what him do. That's how we have normalized murders, because essentially there is this view that, boy, and understandably so, quite frankly, there is this view that whenever a life is taken, it must be consequent on, a reprisal, something that somebody else would have done. So when you hear of 3 men being gunned down or 2 men being gunned down, a man was taken out, contract killing style, the question, somebody will turn to you and say, I wonder what him do. Or a man who in a mix-up. So we know that based on certain deficits in our society, and quite frankly, how the epidemic of violence has emerged in our country, that we have had to grapple over successive political administrations and indeed over successive decades in this country with high incidence of murders. Thankfully, we are now at a point where we have been registering, listeners, sustained reductions in murders. Are we where you could consider tolerable, if we could consider murders and levels of homicides tolerable? The answer is no. We're not where we would consider levels on par with global averages or regional averages, yeah? But considerable strides are being made toward that end. Make no mistake, the loss of any life, the murder of any person, Jamaican or non-Jamaican, here in our jurisdiction, the loss of any person, uptown or downtown, Tapanaris or not, JLP or PNP, is the loss of one person too many. And so ideally, we would want to have a situation where there are no murders in the country. Ideally. But alas, our analysis has to have some bearing on where we are coming from. I beg your pardon. And of course, where we are at present relative to where we're coming from. In short, murders are decreasing in the country. If the current trajectory holds, we are on course to record less than 1,000 murders this calendar year. If the current trajectory holds, we may well come in somewhere in the order of 800 or 800 plus murders for calendar year 2025. My opening commentary this morning is coming to you within a particular context. Jamaica is in an election year. We are slated to go to the polls in the weeks and months ahead. there is always a keen contest of ideas and perspectives when campaigns rage on. And one of the areas of national life and indeed public office and public stewardship that is always in play is the crime management situation in the country. Historically, it's in play. In fact, many will recall the famous comment the now Prime Minister, speaking in his capacity as opposition leader at the time, made in Lucy Hanover back in 2015, much to the chagrin of the parliamentary opposition and its surrogates and supporters. He made mention of whenever the PNP is in office, crime increases or murders rise. And in addition to that, he went on to mention or issue the exhortation that if people want to live safe in them yard, and if they want to be alive, if they want to sleep with their windows and doors open, they should not make the mistake of putting in the PNP. Many persons took and still do to this day take umbrage to that. And I can, and that's quite understandable. Quite understandable. But let's fast forward to the current moment. Whereas historically, or in terms of recent history, modern Jamaican history, the crime situation and murders have always been in play. What is becoming increasingly apparent, not just to people like myself, but also to the critics and detractors of the government, what is becoming increasingly apparent to everyone is that bleating and commentary, exploitation even, of the murder situation in the country will not be figuring in the upcoming general elections in the way it would have figured in the past. And so, it is very clear and evident to me that there are some persons among us who are seeing a particular window slipping by and closing. If we were having 40% increases in murders in the country, it would be total pandemonium right now. You would hear calls for the resignation of Police Commissioner Dr. Kevin Blake. You would be hearing calls for the resignation, the sacking of National Security Minister Dr. Horace Chang. That is what would be keeping right now. But guess what? Murders are going in the other direction. A 36% reduction year to date, as it were. And that has some implications for some. Because Peter Bunting, for example, is not able to run about the place and talk about the National Security Minister needs to be fired and the government is this and that and that and that. That not keep right now. And so, in terms of the political calculus, the cards that are available to the government's detractors, the parliamentary opposition in particular, are dwindling. George Davis, a journalist, operates elsewhere in Radioland, made the point during the budget debate that the opposition PNP is essentially being what he calls boxed out. That means simply that government is doing things, and so many things, and doing them in such a way that the PNP's platform, the parliamentary opposition's platform, to articulate alternatives that are credible and bankable and will attract or should I say resonate with people and appeal to people, is considerably narrow. That's why they have to now come and trying to be promising he, she, and the old lady. The usual campaign on murders and the bloodshed in this country is not on. Where in April, there's a 36% reduction in murders. And we're not just talking about the 3 or so months we have gone in 2025 so far, because many will recall that were it not for a flare-up and a bizarre scenario as it relates to, multiple shootings sometime last year, we could have dipped below 1,000 murders for 2024. In calendar year 2024, there was a 19% reduction in murders. 19%. And that follows the previous year, where there was an 8% reduction in murders. So for calendar year 2023, there was an 8% reduction in murders. Calendar year 2024, a 19% reduction in murders. And we will recall that it was in the latter quarter of 2024 that we saw some bizarre multiple killings. You will recall the Cherry Tree Lane and others like that. I believe there were a couple others like that, where gunmen make the step and just put it on a number of people in one fell swoop, taking out 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 one time. Yeah? Similar to what we saw in Cherry Tree Lane, Clarendon. I believe it may have been September 2024? Yeah. So last year, we could have dipped below 1,000. This year, we are very much on course to not only dip below 1,000, but to perhaps come in the order of 800. And there is, based on what we're seeing from the incumbent police commissioner, there is every sign and likelihood that the constabulary will be keeping its foot on the pedal and will be sustaining the assault on the gangs in the country, even if that means bad news for the people who will no longer be able to take to the political platform and talk about murders in a bid to secure political support. That does not keep. And all of that brings me to a press release that I had occasion to issue yesterday in my capacity as a government senator and a senior spokesperson, I dare say, for the governing Jamaica Labour Party. I called out my Senate colleague, Peter Bunting, because speaking at a conference, as it were, in Grovetown, in his Manchester Southern space, where he is making a bid to unseat or essentially to emerge as Member of Parliament in Manchester Southern, he, speaking in Grovetown, made the point that the police is to be credited. And in a manner that is not surprising or out of character for Peter Bunting, Peter Bunting, is not attributing any credit to the government or indeed the National Security Minister for the sustained reductions in murders. And so I issued a press release to that effect, indicating that you can't have it both ways. When the crime go up, we hold the National Security Minister's foot to the fire. We hold the government's feet to the fire. The government is ridiculed and vilified. Dr. Chang is cussed out and he's called the Sleepy Chang, and all kinds of disparaging references are made. But when the crime is going down, all of a sudden it is all JCF, and there's no acknowledgement of the significant role the government's financial investments in the constabulary and indeed its policy support and legislative support to the JCF would have had on the reductions in murders. And so there are 2 voice notes that I would have issued along with my press release last afternoon, and I'm sharing it with you, my listeners, this morning.
Quite competitive. The opposition spokesman on national security and the PNP as a whole, since taking, should recognize that in instances where murders were trending upwards.
I wanted to play it from the start.
While the cut and thrust of Jamaica's politics is intense and quite competitive, the opposition spokesman on national security and the PNP as a whole should recognize that there is honor in giving credit where credit is due. It cannot be that in instances where murders were trending upwards, the government and the portfolio minister in particular were ridiculed and vilified. But when murders and other major crimes are being reduced significantly, there is this vulgar and self-serving reluctance on the part of Peter Bunting and the opposition PNP to give credit where it is due by acknowledging the government's role in realizing the crime-fighting successes Jamaica is now registering. While the government does not look to the likes of Senator Peter Bunting and the opposition PNP for validation or any honest assessment of our efforts and performance, it is imperative that in a mature democracy, the intelligence of the public looking on is not insulted. The Jamaican people are discerning and they are fully aware that the considerable financial and policy support that have been provided to the JCF over the years by this Andrew Holness-led Jamaica Labour Party government are significant contributors to the successes being realized on the crime-fighting front. The people welcome the sustained reductions in murders because they are well-thinking and they are giving credit where credit is due. And as well-thinking people, they are not just annoyed, but quite frankly, they are extremely offended by the PNP's reluctance to give credit where credit is due. Office in March 2016, the Andrew Holness-led government has made unprecedented investments in national security, and it has done so by spending billions of dollars on the rehabilitation and construction of several police stations, acquiring motor vehicles and other strategic crime-fighting assets to improve mobility and the responsiveness of the JCF, enhancing the technology available to the police, improving the JCF's investigative and forensic capabilities, recruiting police personnel to bring the JCF to its 14,000 members establishment, amending consequential crime-fighting legislation such as the Firearms Act to more effectively deter and punish gun crimes, and finally, increasing the compensation of policemen and women.
There you have it. Gonna go to the break and come back from the break with more here on Straight Up. Do stay with us.
Parish municipality is served by over 50 NWC systems. We group them in what are called urban systems, which are the ones in and around Kingston proper.
Give a couple examples.
You heard that?
Yeah, man, give a couple examples.
Right, so bordering from Harbour View, so our Rockford system or the major systems like Mona, Hope,
Hermitage,
the Constant Spring system set from our Hermitage Dam, our CDU plant, which provides for several years the best tasting water in Caribbean and Latin America. Those are what we call urban systems, also complemented by the Rio Cobre sources that come into Western Kingston. There are also over 30 odd rural systems. Oh, so before I get there, the urban system provides for 94% of the Kingston population. So we're serving close to 460,000 persons from those urban systems. And that's 94% of, to give you another set of numbers, about 38 million gallons of water. So of 38 million gallons of water, 94% come from those urban systems.
Yeah.
On the rural side, we have close to 30 odd systems out of that 50 plus, serving approximately 30,000 customers. So it's about 6% of the KSA population that's served by NWC. More systems, way less persons. And one of the things is because these systems are coming from a time when we had very small catchments, or both river sources or what used to be parish council systems back in the day that the NWC would have taken over. So some of them only serve 30, 40 households. Others serve maybe a couple hundred persons, but no more.
And this all depends on how densely populated a geographic locality
area is, and also the size of the system.
Very well. Proceed.
Right. So now those systems, I'm traveling as you might hear, so forgive me if there's any kind of crackling.
Yeah.
So those systems are all monitored. All systems are on a basis. We take daily samples from them. That the urban systems, especially since a number of them are wells or they are larger treatment facilities, they are always meeting the standards in terms of what MOH, Ministry of Health, or the World Health Organization prescribe for water quality.
Yeah.
We don't have any adverse findings on a monthly basis, and our treatment of all of them remain within the standards. The challenges we find originate with some of the rural facilities, and it's not for lack of treatment, but just the environmental factors that exist around it. So on one day you may have water supply, fair, fine, great quality. On another day, you find that there is high turbidity, which brings down debris.
Tell our listeners what turbidity means.
Turbidity means the river is flooded, so it brings down a lot of bush. It gets very muddy, and sometimes it also carries maybe human disposal, meaning garbage that they might have on the embankment of some of these rivers and so on. Because of these, we have a very strict regimen in terms of testing for water quality. And so some of what you have heard in the public space speaks to our presentation of those reports to the municipal corporation. Similarly, the Ministry of Health does their own testing.
All right, so the first thing to note is that all the data set, all these results, the measurements for all these pollutants and whatnot, emerge from the NWC's protocol and the standard quality assurance mechanisms of testing samples and so on. So this is not Jesse James Clark that did any tests or found out anything. The NWC does this. It does it whether the JLP is in office or whether the PNP is in office. I'm not bringing you down the road of the orange and the green, my brother.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. But just for clarity, So we take these reports and they guide us in terms of our next actions. What the reports show will tell us what needs to be done. And these are done with immediacy. When we have now, for instance, normal water quality, we distribute to customers. When we get readings that show possible pollutants, then we take some steps. We identify the source of it. We shut down the facilities if necessary. If we need to carry out remedial work, we do that. We retest before we redistribute any water to customers.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that the reports don't show in isolation is what those steps are, because the report was just simply presenting,
like a summary,
Sir Morgan, the findings.
Yeah, there you go.
Now, it's simple. To use an analogy, if you go to the doctor and the doctor presents you and say you have flu, that's just half of the discussion. You would then also show your prescription and show your medication when you would have been administered to say, okay, this is what it is. And to make the point further, when you have a reading, it's not to suggest that the system is failing for a continuous month. So you may have a report that shows a system that is out, that is below the prescribed water quality. But if you know the law of averages, you have a group of students in class of, say, 30 students, since we're looking at a 30-day average for our testing. 30 students are getting grades. 25 of them are getting 95 or more. But if you have the remaining 5, which is like 5 days or less, getting below 70 or 80%, it's going to pull down the entire class average. Do you get where I'm going?
Sure, yeah, man.
So what it's suggesting is that you may have 1 or 2 instances where an unforeseen, despite all the NWC's treatment procedures, you have one day that there is an adverse water quality at source. We're still going to present the report to say we had 29 days, but the one day is now going to impact on that average.
Indeed,
and those are some of the
data set. Yeah.
Yes. So it's not to say we are providing a failing water quality to customers. What the report is simply showing is the days, or the total average of the days tested, and how it impacted on water quality, or water quality report.
And what you're saying is that,
yes,
in the event of sampling at source, and the determination is made that the water has a particular undesirable level of pollutant,
right?
Remedial steps are taken to ensure the integrity of the product provided to my Jamaican brothers and sisters.
There you go, right? And so I took the time to make those points because one, the population that is now bearing much of the concern is way too exaggerated.
Oh no, because this is for the
way too exaggerated.
But indeed, but the substantive point here is if even one NWC customer,
I agree with you.
You know, it is of some moment. So
So I was getting to that second point. That one, the population is exaggerated. 2, the concern we treat with all customers remains the same. Right? And those are the remedial steps that we take. I'll go further because the discussion also has to apply to when we have a situation in what is called the distribution network, meaning we treat the water sufficiently, but when it leaves the plant, it comes into contact with any kind of pollutant. We follow the same prescribed steps. We isolate the area, we shut down the entire facility if necessary, we retest before we distribute.
And you may flush the lines,
It includes flushing the lines, as I said, and if whatever the issue is, we strive to target it. One of the things we've been working on is the just the public awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the discussion with the municipal corporation and also with the Ministry of Health have gone. And that was how the activities such as the tour took place, where you want to identify some of the communities that have activities that may be putting the water quality at risk.
Mm-hmm. Just based on some realities in the geographic spaces and what may happen at source.
Right.
Yeah.
So best farming practices, persons doing slash and burn, sometimes those things,
in land
burn the pipes that traverse the cross-country areas, and we have to navigate to replace those pipes, and so on. So these are some of the realities that we take on. There is an important distinction I also want to make, which speaks to... Just give me a second, please.
All right, so we're...
It speaks to... I'm back with you. It speaks to, again, just clarifying what the report shows. The report shows something called total coliform.
All right, before we get to that, because I was coming there.
Yes.
What,
okay,
just define for my listener, or give my listeners a sense as to what is E. coli.
All right. So E. coli is a particular bacteria that comes from the gut of animals, whether they are humans or beasts, right?
Cool.
So whatever they pass out is, if it gets into contact with water sources, then it can cause health hazards. E. coli passing out suggests that it's coming from feces, generally as the main source.
Expected,
right? Right. So that's where now we move from E. coli being a derivative, being derived a result of feces being passed and probably contaminating.
Yeah.
And then feces might be a form of coliform. But so that's where I wanted to go, that feces could be one form of coliform. But the report does not show
the breakdown or that distinction.
And as a matter of fact, the report presented total coliform, which is really a general group of naturally occurring bacteria normally found in the soil or vegetation, and to an extent also the same human waste.
All right, were those levels in the report at intolerable levels or levels outside of?
Yeah, they were high levels.
So they were at intolerable levels in terms of what the Ministry of Health.
The recommendation would be 5%.
And they came in at what?
Right. So the levels were high, which is where our steps come in to treat with them. One of the steps we take immediately when we get a high coliform, which is total coliform. So the distinction I want to make first is that the report is not showing feces. It's showing total coliform, which is just a naturally occurring bacteria. So it's a misrepresentation to say this is showing feces on the report.
I'm going to ask you to pause so I can do a bit of editorializing.
No problem.
So in short, listeners, in the water system, based on the sample taking, it was determined, and this is what the report of the NWC suggested as well, that there was a particular outturn in relation to coliform. This was, however, total coliform. You can disaggregate from that to determine measures or levels of fecal coliform. But the report that Jesse James Clark took and ran with and essentially suggested that it was fecal coliform. The reading in the report was actually speaking to total coliform. So continue, Sir Williams.
Yeah, man. So when we see any kind of reading that is adverse, obviously once we get a reading, whether it's 1% or in some of the cases we saw readings showing 15% or more, we immediately do further tests to verify that the risky versions of coliform, such as feces, are whether or not they are present. And for most of the samples, nearly over 90% of the samples, there were no such cases.
Yeah.
In fact, we had 2% at most being reflected for coliform. But again, that's where our steps would have been taken in terms of saying, okay, we have done our treatment process, and yet we've had these adverse findings. So we do the remedial steps, which is to shut down, take whatever steps we need to take. For instance, in some areas when you have high turbidity, you allow the water to run until it clears. We retest before we proceed. And I don't want to necessarily mix too many areas in it, but recently you may have seen a release that we put out for the real Cobra system. And it's just to demonstrate the steps that we take irrespective of where we are situated. The real Cobra system, we test the raw water and then we test before we distribute again.
So this will be the treated water?
Right.
So the raw water is the water coming in at source?
From the river or the spring or so on.
So that's the pre-treated, and then you have the after, which is the post-treated now?
Yes.
That you sample.
And that's the same standard for the rural systems in KSA. Now, recently we put a notice out that we shut down our Spanish Town treatment plant. And the simple reason was we took readings at the source before we started treatment, and the water quality was below standard. So we shut it down. And we would have then waited, retested, and once we confirmed that the standard was back within the levels prescribed for human consumption, we resumed water treatment and then distribution to customers. It's the same thing that we do in St. James, in St. Elizabeth, in Clarendon, in Portland. It doesn't matter where. That's the standard.
All right, let me see if we can just get that clearly again. You're saying if we have if a determination, if a sampling unearths Delano Williams, that we have levels of fecal coliform in the water, right? Yes. What happens? What does the NWC do?
We test for coliform first.
If they're very so
and then we do a further test for fecal coliform. If the
what triggers the further test, or is it just an automatic thing?
It's an automatic thing. As a matter of fact, even if the total coliform reading is high, we're going to shut down.
So we test for total coliform in the first instance, then we drill down a bit to test for levels of fecal coliform.
Right, because remember now, the fecal coliform, which breeds E. coli, is one of the harmful versions of coliform that you don't want to mess with.
Yeah.
Right, and that is why we got very concerned when a report that is simply showing the samples taken and what those samples represent was presented as fecal and also presented as an action
press release from wearing a particular hat that I wear, shutting down that or rubbishing that rubbish. Yeah, but we're not taking into that. So we're coming back to our fecal coliform now. So if the sampling, the further testing, meaning, or should I say, that subsequent testing determines that we have fecal coliform present, share with my listeners, some of whom just genuinely want to be better apprised of this situation.
Right.
What does the NWC do in the instance where a sample of water is determined to contain levels of fecal coliform, listeners? Talk to them.
Immediately at source, we shut down. So we take if the water is coming in, so we have what is called an intake tank at some of the facilities. If the water is coming in at that point, we shut down. If it got into the intake area, we then flush, sterilize, sterilize, flush, retest before we recommence. So we retest the source, and we also take samples of the intake tank to make sure that there is no residual contamination. If it is, and then we resume distribution. If it is on the network, for instance, I said to you, like a slash and burn. So some of the pipes run through cross-country areas. If there's a slash and burn activity or something that causes or clearing of land or runoff water that finds its way into a point of pipeline break, we then go, and in some instances what we do is we do a sterilization of the line. So we lock the system down to customers. We will issue, as we've done in some instances, a do not drink notice to the community.
We have seen that, Delano, in practical terms, following the passage of adverse weather systems, for example. And sometimes when the water come back on, you see a little brown in the water, and we are advised to make that run off a bit.
Just let it flush off, right. So that's just to vent the line. In some areas, we have large hydrants, or what we call washout valves.
Yeah.
We turn those on. As I said, we notify the community because the line will now have a higher concentration of disinfection, mainly chlorine. So we do a flush, but we have to lock it in for a while, and then we flush, and then we retest before we redistribute. Any point that the pipe has a break, we carry out the necessary repairs or replacement before, so there is no further intrusion. Because a lot of times what you see is, if you see a pipe break, you see water gushing out.
Yeah.
But sometimes debris can also get sucked into the line. And that's why after many repairs, sometimes customers will see a hydrant running on the road, and even though we are in a dry spell and they don't like to see water wasting, it's also a precaution to ensure that no contaminant gets to customers.
So you make that bit of it run off a bit.
Yes.
And then once we are assured now, we will resume regular service, as it were.
There you go.
All right. So just to be very clear to the listeners, Delano Williams,
Yeah, man.
we do not have any compromise of the water being supplied and distributed by the NWC, such that citizens would have to go in the business of boiling their water prior to using it for cooking or for drinking it from the tap. Is that the case?
Well, I am guided by the Ministry of Health.
Yeah.
I have demonstrated to you and to the public
what the process is.
What the process is. We take the samples, we provide it to them. We know the samples are also adhering, and where we have. So we're not going to pretend that there is no adverse
readings from time to time.
Right.
Yeah.
They do
That's
occur.
the nature of it.
And as I said, if you have a group of students, you're going to, the register will show those who come late, those who are performing, those who don't perform. What we have in the public now is mix up between a student who comes late and then you're saying he's failing in exam. The two
it's elite, man.
don't necessarily
These
go
kinds
together.
of things happen when people are desperate and people are trying to make a point. But this is not a point for you. This is just an editorializing.
No, I wouldn't want to comment on that. What I want to comment
this is
on
an
is
editorializing on my part. You said something very importantly a while ago, that from time to time we do have adverse readings.
We
so
do,
in other words,
and the nature of the areas.
Based on all of the
challenges.
things, there you go.
Yes.
Based on all the things Delano Williams set out in terms of ill-advised practices such as slash and burn, human and animal waste, just natural phenomena such as rainfall and it running off into the river systems or other receptacles. The point is, from time to time, adverse readings do arise, and it may arise whether Andrew Holness is Prime Minister, whether Portia Simpson-Miller is Prime Minister, whether P.J. Patterson is Prime Minister, or whether Bruce Golding is Prime Minister. That's a simple point. Am I correct, Mr. Williams?
As long as there is sun coming up and rain falling, we're going to have the realities. What I'll also say is we we provide the reports,
Yeah.
and we were also open enough to have the discussions with all of our stakeholders.
Absolutely, and the public appreciates that.
Right, and whatever recommendations have been brought to the table, plus the ones that we are implementing,
Yeah.
we have embraced them, and we continue to evolve because.
And then in 10 seconds, Delano, is the NWC going to be moving to publish these samples and findings as a matter of course and routine to the public in general? Is the NWC has NWC thought of that, and have you arrived at a position on that?
We have no issue. We have no issue publishing our reports because, as I said to you, what is missing now is not that the reports don't present the truth. What the reports lack, as they were presented in the public, is
the breakdown,
the full story.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
you know, and the discussion like this one is appreciated because it helps to unveil the rigorous steps we go through.
The public. There you go.
Yeah, man.
All right, we are out of time. I really must thank you for your time this morning, Delano.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me, all right? And good day to your listeners.
Indeed. That was, listeners, the Corporate Public Relations Manager at the National Water Commission, Mr. Delano Williams. We run to the NPR News and come back with more here on Straight Up at 10:10. Do stay with us.